Okay, this video is about stress in the brain. It's chapter 32 of this book, The Medical Reformation and the Vegan Renaissance. Okay, so stress has obviously a big effect on the brain. Stress increases, the hormones of cortisol and the catecholamines. Cortisol is a corticosteroid hormone. Catecholamine means epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, and another question is, well, what makes you more resilient, able to better handle stress? Number one is stoicism, which is sort of the philosophy of some of the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks. Like Epictetus was the Greek slave in Rome. Basically, don't bother your mind thinking about the things you can't control. Focus on what you can control and just accept the fact that life is the way it is. Okay, that's sort of stoicism. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, was also a famous stoic. Faith in God. And it's a little bit like that one serenity prayer. You only bother with the things that you have some control over. Faith in God makes people more resilient. Keeping yourself in good health makes you more resilient. Getting your sunshine in the daytime to have your vitamin D. Having loving relationships with your family, your parents, your kids. Maintaining some type of social supports. Trying to get along with people and maintain some good relationships in your life. Having some money is helpful for handling difficult situations. Having a sense of purpose in your life. I think that's one of the most important controllable variables, because as long as you feel like, well, at least I'm doing this one thing that's really good, it helps you to accept the problems and the sadness in other areas of your life. I mean, if your whole life feels like it's going nowhere and in no good direction, then you're going to be sad. But if you feel like at least I'm pursuing this one good thing despite the fact that I'm kind of getting hassled or ripped off in other ways, you'll at least have some happiness from that. That's actually a more powerful thing than one realizes. And a lot of people have come to that conclusion. Viktor Frankl, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer said, forget about having a happy life. You can't control your life enough to really be able to make yourself happy. But if you focus on having a heroic life, doing what you feel you should do, then you like yourself, you respect yourself, and that makes you happier. And that's actually true. Adequate sleep. Yeah, you're a lot more resilient when you've got adequate sleep. Lack of sleep raises your stress level a lot. Maintaining good health, getting exercise, having good role models. Like sometimes I'll say to myself, I want to be like such and such a person, and in order to be like them, some good person, I have to do this, this, and this. And that helped me a lot in wrestling. As soon as I started hanging around with the Schultz brothers, like Mark Schultz in particular, and he would tell me this, 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 I would do exactly what he said, and I just kept getting better and better at wrestling. I wish I had talked to him my freshman year, the beginning of my freshman year, instead of the end of my sophomore year. Okay, having heroes. Again, I'll try to be like my heroes, and that gives me more energy, resilience, and sense of direction. Self-esteem. When you're doing what you should be doing, you like yourself because you feel like, yes, I'm holding up to the agreement I had with myself, and you respect yourself because of that. Social adaptability. Yeah, you got to learn how to make lemons out of lemonade and just go with the flow and not get bothered by trivial things you can't control. Friends make you happier, healthy diet, simplified life. Simplified life's a big one because there's always more things that want your time, so you have to basically decide what matters and what's trivial and avoid all the trivial stuff as much as you can. Why does stress kill people? Because it makes your blood more thrombotic, so it increases your risk of having a heart attack or a stroke. Being stressed out will increase factor VIII, clotting factor, fibrinogen, clotting factor, acute phase reactant protein, increase platelet activation. Okay. Stress increases your risk of infection and cancer because it suppresses your immune system, so you're more vulnerable to cancer. If you're chronically stressed out, you're more vulnerable to cancer and infections. Like I said, too, it also increases the risk of cancer and metastatic spread because it activates platelets, and the platelets, when they're activated, they can form almost like a miniature clot around metastasizing cancer cells in your blood, and they hide them from the immune system. Stress will increase the risk of cognitive impairment. Yeah, it has an excitotoxin effect on the brain when it is excessive. Stress increases the risk of leaky gut. When you got leaky gut, you get more postprandial bacterial endotoxemia, more endotoxemia-related clots, all things that can worsen cognitive function. And the leaky gut can cause autoimmune disease, a whole bunch of things. What is stress? Stress is typically a physiological response to some immediate danger, like a perceived physical danger. And usually it's designed to help us survive for the next 15, 20 minutes. It's not designed to go on and on day after day. It also can happen when we're tired from a lack of sleep to give us more energy. And a little bit of stress can be good to energize you to do some athletic activity or whatever else it is that you have to do. So a healthy amount of stress is called eustress, EU stress. Okay, bad stress is distress. There's something called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which basically says, let's say you have to perform an athletic task or give a lecture or something, write a book chapter that day, and you need a little bit of stress to energize you to do the task, to get you in the groove, in the mood, pumped up. Okay, but you don't want too much excessive stress that you're anxious, you're nervous, or you're suboptimal in your performance. What causes stress? There's obviously tons of things. They all can converge on contributing to having a big stressful moment or feeling. The most important hormones of stress, like we said, are cortisol and the catecholamines, adrenaline, noradrenaline, which is the same thing as epinephrine, norepinephrine. Okay. There's also some involvement of what's called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. What are stress equivalents? Well, like I said, if you're sleep deprived, you get the same hormones elevated. If you're drinking caffeine, you get the same hormones elevated. So those are stress equivalents. That's another reason why I quit coffee and I don't ingest any form of caffeine at all. And caffeine is addictive, so it'll get you having more and more of it. When you quit, you'll have some withdrawal symptoms. Caffeine has a diuretic effect, which can make you thirstier. It has an insomnia effect, so you don't sleep as well. Soda pop makers will put salt into soda pops to make a person thirstier and drink more, and then they'll add more high fructose corn syrup to cover up the taste of the salt. Again, it's a big trick, and it's got BPA coating and estrogenic chemical to make you fatter. There's aluminum in the inside surface of the can to make you stupider. Stress kind of puts you into what's called a limbic mentality. So limbic system is the mammal brain. So the way your brain works is you got your brainstem, kind of from the side, looks like a fist. All right, and that's your brainstem. It's connected to your spinal cord, and that's your reptile brain, so to speak. Above that is shaped like the letter C on a Chicago Bears football helmet. That's your limbic system, or your mammal brain, if you will. And on top of that is your cerebral cortex, your primate brain or human brain. And so the point of the matter is when you get an acute, intense stress response, you get a little less blood supply to your frontal lobes, and you become a little more like a mammal, fight, flight, or freeze. And so you don't think as sophisticated, nuanced of a way. You're more energized to do something, to run, to fight, whatever it is you have to do, but it makes you a little bit less intelligent. I never drank caffeine at the time when I was, doing fantastic in school. I didn't start drinking caffeine until my internship when I was on call a lot. I did a surgical internship. Okay. So caffeine will decrease your emotional resilience. Okay, don't get me wrong. If you have a long drive and you're sleep deprived, caffeine will help you to stay awake. That's important, but you don't want it on a routine basis when you're trying to do your most creative thinking. Caffeine will increase your urinary excretion of magnesium, which is bad because you need magnesium for all kinds of things in your brain and elsewhere. So that's bad. Stress will also increase that magnesium excretion. It increases your risk of coronary vasospasm, which is rare, but you don't want to be deficient in magnesium. Lots of people are deficient in magnesium. Oh, by the way, here's a book, Caffeine Blues. It tells you a lot about caffeine, summarizes health studies on it. Okay, because you hear all these positive things about caffeine. That's because it's $1 billion food product, so it gets lots of promotion. Now, if you have to do an athletic thing, some people say that, caffeine and with a sugary drink like caffeine and ice or something can improve athletic performance. And some of the Kenya, world champion marathon runners will drink that before a marathon. Okay, fine. If you're running a marathon, fine. But on a daily basis for a regular person who probably has an office job, I think caffeine is a bad idea. The typical metaphor for remembering what does stress do to you, it's like being chased by a tiger in the dark. You have to get more blood flow to your muscles, decrease blood flow to your gut, decrease blood flow to your immune system. Your pupils are dilate like being chased by a tiger in the dark. All that matters is surviving the next, 5 to 20 minutes. So you don't need your immune system. You can turn it off. You don't need your gut digestion. You can turn that off. You don't need growth or healing. You can turn all that stuff off. So the problem, though, is when you're stressed all the time, you basically turned on, almost shut off your ability to fight infections and to grow and to heal. So you don't want that. Cortisol also kind of wakes you up a little bit. It's the opposite of melatonin. So when that's chronically high, when you're stressed out, you don't sleep as well. You don't sleep as well, then you're sleep deprived the next day and you're stressed out again. Cortisol also increases blood glucose level. It causes insulin resistance. So the elevated cortisol worsens diabetes. Okay, and you'll get lymphoid system atrophy. You'll decrease secretion of secretory IgA antibody, but that's not good. Having decreased total body, some lymphoid atrophy, that's a problem, and cortisol will do that. So when your immune system is becoming atrophic, you're more vulnerable to infections and to cancer. Okay, melatonin does the opposite. It improves immune function. Excessive cortisol also has an excitotoxin effect. It increases glutamate transmission at the hippocampal neurons. Hippocampus is your memory center. So basically, glutamate is about 90% of brain neurotransmitters, and when you have increased glutamate release, you're getting increased activation of the postsynaptic neuron. So it's called an excitotoxin. It'll cause increased calcium to go into the cytoplasm. And, you know, if you're thinking and reading, you want your brain neurons active, but you don't want them activated for no reason other than that your hormones are elevated. Iatrogenic means, you know, due to a pill. So if you're taking corticosteroid medications, that will increase the amount of active cortisol in your body. Cushing syndrome with elevated corticosteroids, cortisol from a tumor is quite rare. You can see, though, by elevating blood glucose, it increases your risk of diabetes, and it has an excitotoxin effect on the brain, and it increases your risk of clotting complications, heart attacks, and strokes. It also increases von Willebrand factor for clotting, factor VIII, etc. Okay. And you don't want to stress out your parents or anything just because there will be a little more increased risk for a cardiac event right in the 2 hours after that emotional event. So you want to avoid that if you can. It raises your blood pressure, and because you get some volume increase from the cortisol, and you get increased cardiac pumping from the catecholamines, so that'll raise your blood pressure. Elevated blood pressure will injure arteries at bifurcation points, and it'll increase atherosclerosis. Increased atherosclerosis can cause problems wherever it occurs, like in the kidney. It can decrease kidney function. Cortisol also causes osteoporosis, increased resorption of the bones, and that will lead to increased urinary calcium, which leads to increased risk of calciuria, which can lead to increased risk of kidney stones. So it's all bad. Again, its purpose is to help you survive the next 15, 20 minutes in a physical emergency. It's not for these other things. So you don't want chronically elevated cortisol or catecholamines. The body's a use it or lose it system, so you got to keep exercising to maintain your physical fitness. Okay, excessive ingestion of industrial fructose will also cause increased calcium excretion in the urine. What is the physiologic effect of stress on the bones? Like I said, acute stress, it has no effect, but on a chronic psychological stress will give you chronic cortisol, and that'll predispose you to osteoporosis. What happens to immune function? Like I said, during an acute physical emergency, long-term growth doesn't matter, so you shut all that stuff off. You're not worried about bacterial growth, so what if your blood iron is higher? Some viruses, like it appears that the herpes family viruses for cold sores, for example, seem able to somehow sense the cortisol levels, and when it's high, they're more likely to reoccur. They know the immune system can't do as much to them. Okay, what about cortisol, stress, and cancer risk? Yeah, caffeine also can decrease the ability of the body to repair DNA. Chronic high stress increases the risk of cancer. We talked about the platelet activation as well. What's the effect of stress on the body stores of magnesium? Yeah, you void out more magnesium, so then you get all the problems related to magnesium deficiency, and there's a lot of them. What happens to blood pressure? Blood pressure goes up because cortisol retains blood volume, and catecholamines increase pumping pressure. It causes worse wound healing. Caffeine can also lead to a decrease in DNA repair. What is the effect of stress on body weight? Well, acutely none, but chronically stressed out people get more insomnia, and that's perceived as stress. There's a bit of a vicious cycle. They'll tend to eat more sweets, and they'll also tend to eventually get fatter. I've known some doctors that were kind of stressed out, working long hours and sleep deprived, and they had a tendency towards becoming obese. Okay, I talked about the excitotoxin effect of cortisol. So stroke recovery, you don't want them stressed out because their blood's more thrombotic. They might thrombose off the microvasculature in the adjacent tissue to the stroke, the penumbra, and you want to try to protect the penumbra. What's the significance of hippocampal atrophy? It makes you stupid. You need the hippocampus to form new memory. So if it's all atrophic, then you're at increased risk to become cognitively impaired. Okay, what are metabolic effects of stress on the brain? Well, I talked about increased glutamate. I talked about insomnia from the cortisol. When you increase neuron and metabolic demand, you had better increase oxygen and glucose delivery, or you can have brain cells lost by going into apoptosis. Let's see, what else is interesting? Free iron overload can contribute to redox cycling, dietary sodium to vasoconstriction. That kind of adds to the hypertension induced by the stress. So basically, it's all bad. The acute stress response is only good for what it's made for. It's good to help you survive, the next 20 minutes with an acute physical emergency. But it's a bad thing on a chronic basis. Okay, here's some other chapter I wrote about that. Those excitotoxin effects are going to increase cytoplasmic calcium, which can eventually push that neuron into apoptosis. The hippocampus is where you form new memories, like declarative memories, remembering facts, things that you could talk about. Unlike procedural memory, which is things that you just do, like ride a bike, that's more of a cerebellar thing, versus things you talk about is more of a hippocampal related thing. In the brain, we're not going to get into all this diabetes stuff, but diabetes really worsens cognitive function. Okay, so the overall effect of high stress on the body is it makes you weaker, it makes you immune suppressed, it makes you more anxious, more sleep deprived. It's all bad. You just want enough stress to enable you to do whatever you have to do. But you don't want more than that. And you don't want to be chronically stressed. These chronically stressed out patients, like with post-traumatic stress disorder, they can get over time hippocampus atrophy and have cognitive impairment, cognitive slowing. All right, so that's it for chapter 32 on stress. Hope that was helpful.